Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in.
She has a wonderful personality. She really does.
You are listening to Talking with Gloria.
Let's take a walk on the wild side.
With your host, Gloria Ponziano.
Well, hello, everybody. Good evening. This is Gloria Ponziano, and you are talking with Gloria. Welcome to the show tonight. As you know, we have Michael Rhodes, not in studio, but he's coming to us all the way from down under in Australia. And we're going to be talking to him in just a minute. But I want to tell you a little bit about him and what I know about him, and then we're going to have him fill in a lot of blanks. He is coming to us via Skype. So if there's any kind of technical glitches or anything, I'm sure my engineer will let us know. Michael Rhodes, a friend of mine gave me a book of his. The very first book that I ever read was called Getting There. And I was absolutely I love this book. And I don't want to talk too much about the book itself because I want Michael to do that. But that book was so incredible. It really made me get in touch with myself. It was comical. It was serious when it needed to be. It was just brilliant. And in 2010, I did an interview with Michael when I was in Sarasota, Florida, which was one of the best interviews that I ever had, except that we failed to record it. So I was really very, very thrilled when Michael agreed to give me another interview. And instead of him being stateside, he is coming to us live from Australia. Good evening, Michael.
Good morning, Gloria.
That's right. It's morning there. It's around, 9:30?
It's 9:30. It's difficult to say good evening when it's morning, but I will say good evening.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you here and to have you back on an interview with me. I'm so glad that we got to talk, and we had a few glitches, and I hope I'm coming through loud and clear over there. Am I?
You're coming through very well, and it's my pleasure to be talking with you.
Well, tell me a little bit about, was Getting There your first book?
Oh, no. My first book I probably ever wrote was way back in the 70s. I wrote A Guide to Organic Gardening in Australia, which became an instant bestseller. Then I wrote A Guide to Organic Living in Australia, which also became a bestseller. But I wasn't convinced I could write. I consider they were two flukes because they only took me 2 weeks to write each of them. So I was, you've got to remember, I was a school dropout, so I just didn't consider I could write. And then a few years later, I wrote Communicating with Nature, which in Australia didn't do anything, but I sent that copy of that to Hal Kramer, and that became Talking with Nature, which over the years became a bestseller and which is still in print, in publication today. And so that's way back in the 70s and 80s.
Okay. And then...
Whereas I wrote Getting There in around about 1999, 1998.
Wow. I had no idea that book was that old because I didn't read it until 2000, I think late 2009. Is when it came into my hands. A friend of mine sent it to me.
Well, maybe that was the perfect timing.
I think so. Now, you've got a few more books to add to your resume here. You've got A Glimpse of Something Greater. Is this something new?
A Glimpse of Something Greater. Well, that was actually, I first wrote a book years ago, back in the 80s, Simple is Powerful. Now, in an Asian country like Japan, Simple is Powerful would be a very powerful title because they believe in the power of simplicity. But in a Western world, anything that has a name Simple in it is basically looked on as stupid. And so it wasn't a clever title at all, Simple is Powerful. And it didn't do very well. And I sort of reread it maybe 20 years later, and I thought to myself, I'm going to write it in a different way. I'm going to bring the book up to date. I'm going to put it in chronological order. And I'm going to write a before and an after of each story because it's all a whole lot of stories out of my life. So it begins when I'm about 17, and it continues up into my 70s when I tells a story of my awakening, enlightenment. It tells a story of experiencing unconditional love. It does all that, but it's a book that is like almost like an introductory book. If you didn't know what I was on about and you read that, by the end of that, you'll know quite a lot about me and my story. But what I found, Gloria, was that all through our life, we have our little stories, each one of us. We have little incidents, we have little events, and we tell our stories to people, but we see them all as separate stories. And what I realized quite recently was that all these stories have a greater meaning behind them. They're all showing you something greater in life, they're all giving you a glimpse of something greater. And so I looked at my stories and realized that they all added up to one story. And this is what I've suggested in the book, that if you look at the stories in your life, all the little stories, often they begin to repeat themselves over and over through the decades. And you realize in your 60s, oh my gosh, I'm repeating something that happened when I was 10 years old. But we see it in a different way. We approach it with a different intellect, and we don't realize it's exactly the same situation arising in our life. And so what I'm showing in that book is that all these little stories actually add up to one great big story. And often that big story is completely unresolved.
Now, that's fascinating because that's exactly what I feel is happening in my life. Things are repeating themselves. So do you feel like that? Where does the Oracle fit in when you wrote the Oracle? Where does that fit in the timeline of all the books?
The Oracle? Did you say the Oracle?
Yes.
Oh, the Oracle. Gosh, when did I write the Oracle? Somewhere around about. Well, what happened, you see, I found that I was saving all my aphorisms. My father liked aphorisms. An aphorism is a short, pithy saying of wisdom. My father liked his, and some of them were wise, some of them were just clever. But through the years, I found that when I was giving talks, I was creating aphorisms, and I would get my late wife to write them down when she heard them, and I would write them down. And for 10 years passed, and I realized that I'd got a big collection of my own aphorisms. And one day I started counting them, and I got to about 300. And so then I wrote them all out so I could sort of look at them in a list, and took out all the repeats because there was quite a lot, and realized I still had about 300 left. I'd had many more of that. And so then I sat down and made up certain aphorisms. Over the next year, I watched carefully in my own speaking, and finally I had 366. None of them repeat. And so I put them together in the book, The Oracle. So there's one wisdom quote of mine, basically for every day, with a bit of an explanation. And that was probably around the year, I don't know, maybe late 90s.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I was really fascinated with the first interview that we had back in 2010 was, I don't know, Michael, you have such a, I don't want to say a presence because obviously I'm not there, but you have something. I can't really quite put my finger on it, but I've heard people talk about this. I don't know if it's your energy or what it is, but when you talk to people in your, I don't know, when you travel around and you're asked to speak at a speaking engagement, what are some of the things that people have you talk to them about? I mean, do you just talk about your books? Because I can find a lot to ask you just with getting there.
I very rarely talk about my books. I always consider if people read it, then they don't really want to hear me keep saying it over and over and over.
Okay, good point. Let's do that.
But so I don't often talk about my books. But like, for instance, now I'm on Through the Eyes of Love, book 4, Journeying with Pan, book 4. And I'm sort of well into that. So I'm now having experiences that even a year ago I couldn't have even considered, because they are I mean, they're really stretching me. Everything I do on this metaphysical traveling of mine really stretches me. So in a way, you know, life is about focus. Where you focus, energy flows. Your thoughts and your words generally, and your emotions, they are your normal focus in life. So everything we say always has an emotional content. You can't bring up a thought without feeling an emotion. But a lot of the thoughts are subconscious, about 60,000 a day. Now, they are repeats. They're repeat thoughts that have been going on forever. And then with those subconscious thoughts comes sub-emotions. And so most people live in a subconscious and sub-emotional way. It's not very powerful. And so those people we don't tend to notice them too much. I guess when you're talking about my presence, is basically as much as possible, I live consciously, and I engage quite a lot of new thought, new speculation, new fields of energy. Because when I'm at home, I'm always writing a book. I don't have a book on the go. It's just, I've got 2 on the go at the moment. So there's always a book on the go. And so that brings my focus always into to my spirituality, to consciousness, to basically the cutting edge of human consciousness. And when I'm not at home, I'm traveling the world, and I spend 4 months in one go. And I visited last year 14 countries. Generally, I'm content with around about a dozen, and I'm not quite so busy. But again, my focus is sharing this. It's not information, it's sharing this truth and sharing love with many, many people. And so my focus is all the time on consciousness, on human growth, on unconditional love, and things like that. And so naturally, I'm enthusiastic about that. I mean, the word enthusiasm means God-filled. And so I'm very enthusiastic what I do. I love what I do. I'm not sure I love flying in airplanes, but all around it I like, and I love it. And so your energy rises when you're doing what you love to do. Where you focus, energy flows. Now, this energy comes from you. When you're focusing on repeats that you've done 1,000 years, there's not a great deal of energy coming. But when your focus is moving into newness generates its own energy. And so, you know, here I am moving toward my late 70s in a physical body, and I'm feeling more energy often than I've ever experienced in my life.
Let me ask you something. There's a lot of people, I believe, that are awakening now, yeah. And we'll get into that in a second, as far as like the shift of consciousness and so on and so forth. But this sounds very similar to the law of attraction, what you're talking about, that our thoughts and our emotions and the amount of energy that goes into conscious thought is something that we pull back into our lives. So am I correct to assume what you're saying, that what we focus our attention on, we're drawing back into us?
Yes. I mean, most people, I mean, I don't want to sound judgmental, but probably 85% of the world's population lives subconsciously and sub-emotionally. And the subconscious always is more of the same, more of the same. And so we have over here, we have major disasters in Australia. Mm-hmm. 2 years ago, we were being flooded.
Right.
Now we're in a terrible drought and being burnt out everywhere with wildfires. And so, but when it all ends, everybody wants their old life back. They want their old life back. A flood, a fire, it's changing your life. It sweeps away your home. You've got nothing left. You've been utterly destroyed, everything that you own. People then want to get it all back again. Very few people look at it and say, okay, life has just taken everything away from me. Is this by any chance suggesting I need to change my life entirely and begin to walk in a completely new direction? 85% of the world's population would go back to more of the same house, same place, everything more of the same, which isn't bad or wrong in any way. And I'm not criticizing this. Only 15% of the population of the world would look on that as a clear and certain way of knowing, okay, I need to move on. This is not the place anymore. I'm moving into newness now. And so generally we need to be forced into newness. For me, I like to willingly walk there. And when you willingly walk there, life accompanies you with great joy. When you're pushed, it's not quite so easy. I mean, I've spent many years being pushed.
Oh my goodness. I told my listeners that if there was only one interview that I could ever do, and this would be the last interview, it would definitely be with you. So this is why I want to say very little. I want you to just kind of let your own your own spirit, your own consciousness lead this interview, because I'm always amazed at because everything you said is hitting me right on the nail. I mean, hitting the nail right on the head. It's exactly what I'm feeling. I mean, so many things. And I know a lot of people where their lives have literally been turned upside down. And to me, what I feel is like, okay, something definitely has to change. And you're right about the 15%. I didn't know it was 15%. But most people want to stay in that same rut. They don't want to change. Now,
that's only a ballpark figure. It's rather, you see, what we have a population in the world, and this is every country, where everybody relies, they depend on government, and many of them on religions. But everybody looks for a support that is outside of themselves. And so what this does, this way of acting, this way of relying on governments, relying on religion, relying on all the various social services to help us, takes away self-reliance. And as it takes away self-reliance, so our pineal gland, which is basically connected to the third eye, that pineal becomes less and less active. And then we do things like put fluoride in the water, and gradually we calcify through food and many of our drinks. And through our actions and our thinkings, we atrophy the pineal gland. And so this reduces us in our ability to be universal people instead of just, we become just earth people. There are many people, certainly a lot of people believe that there are space beings, but a huge amount of people don't think there are, simply because, this earth is all there is. It's not very long ago when the earth was considered to be flat, and the idea it was round was outrageous. Equally, it's the same, we have the same problem. It's still developing. We're assisted by technology, but we're not developing in the full potential that a human being has. This doesn't mean that we can't, but we're not. And what 2012 was not about fireworks, and it was not about major events, which were quite possibly could have happened, and are still a possibility. But it was about a change of an energetic change, a frequency change throughout our world, in fact, through our galaxy, because it's not just Earth that is involved in this. So there has been a change of frequency. And what I can tell you is that and this is something I've only just very recently learned, the frequency, you see, we live in a cosmic frequency, but we live alone and isolated and separated. But the pineal gland has the ability to pick up that frequency and then lower it. And as it lowers it, the pituitary then takes that frequency and lowers it a bit further. And finally, the brain can access this frequency and take information from it that the mind can deal with. And so what's happening now is that frequency is being raised, which means that the ability of the pineal has to increase, and the pituitary. And the only way we're going to get that is by being whole brain people. And again, it's interesting that 85% of people are very left brain dominant. And this again does not mean wrong or bad or criticism, but that left brain dominant, the left brain does not pick up easily on pineal activity, because pineal activity, pineal information basically is coming from the universe, it's coming from the galaxy. It's not based in logic and reason. And the left brain operator needs logic and reason to make sense of it. And so we've gone through a shift that is going to literally affect the way our brains work. And if we don't go with that, then probably we will get sick and leave the planet and try again in the next incarnation.
Okay, just to be clear, and I know that there's always, because I have a very dear friend in Australia, and we say things a little bit differently. So you're talking about the pineal gland. That is correct, right? Okay. So,
I guess so. You have a strange language, you Americans.
yes, we do. And depending on what part of the country you're in, it can get even stranger. But let me go back to a question as far as like the frequency changing. I've heard some people talk about that possibly even our DNA would be changing. What are your thoughts on that?
DNA does change, definitely. We have we're not using much of the double helix strand. I think there's about 60 strands in there, and we're using something like 26. That will increase, but it's not just going to increase in everybody. We have to earn that. If you, for instance, move into an experience of unconditional love, and you look at life and people and everything that's happening in your life from a viewpoint of unconditional love, what will happen is your DNA will begin to change. Because when you're loving yourself, when you're loving everything, there are 7 little groups of muscles in the heart. And when you're loving everything, those muscles begin to become what is known as coherent. And so those muscles act coherently. This means that your brain then has to become more whole brain to connect with this heart coherence. And so then you're getting far more heart intelligence. And the person who does that is moving from brain intellect to heart intelligence. And this is very much what this change has been about, from moving from the huge dominance of brain intellect to a far greater level of heart intelligence. When you have heart intelligence, you don't have war. You don't have a country that has a debt of $16 trillion. You don't have these sort of things happening because heart intelligence doesn't go there. Brain intellect will happily go there and put it all off till tomorrow, never forgetting that tomorrow eventually arrives, even if it's then called today.
Now, define for me, there's 2 things that I wanted to say, but I didn't, you were on such a roll, I didn't want to stop you. Define unconditional love for our listeners. When you talk about unconditional love, I mean, I got a pretty good idea just from reading some of the things that you write, but for our listeners, what do you mean by unconditional love? Because most Americans, anyway, think that unconditional love means, oh, I love Joe or Sally or, whoever, my kids, in such a way that I would do anything for them. So why don't you define for us?
It's interesting, isn't it? Every great spiritual teacher through the ages has always come to teach unconditional love, age after age. And why is this? Because nobody's ever figured out what it is. And so what we have a world that looks on love as an emotion, and which is interesting because if love is the creation of the world, then the world was creating from emotion. But I don't think so. And so what we have is we have our emotions. And believe me, I've met metaphysically, I've met many beings from many different places, and I've never come across any beings that have an emotional level or content quite like a human.
You're saying that you've had contact with other beings?
Sorry?
Did you say that you've had contact with other beings?
Metaphysically, yes. I mean, my books are full of it. But none of them have the emotional content of a human being.
Why do we then?
We have three levels to our emotions. We have lower. An example of that, I would say, hi, how are you, Gloria? And you say, not bad. That's lower emotional response. Very common in Australia. Second level, the next level is mid-level emotions. And I say, how are you, Gloria? And you say, oh, I'm fine, I'm okay. That's mid-level emotions. Then there's high-level emotions. And I say, how are you, Gloria? And you say, oh, I'm great, fantastic. That's high-level emotions. None of that is love. And so we have generally an emotional connection with our husbands and wives and children. There is always an emotional connection. So there is something else. The very power of creation is love, with a big capital L. This love is unconditional. And so unconditional love is nothing that the mind or the brain can reason with. Now, this gets really interesting. I hope you're listening carefully. I love it. Now, we have the moment, and the only place that God is, that love is, that consciousness is, that intelligence is, and that joy is, and peace, the only place they exist is in the moment. They do not exist outside of it. Now, when you realize you can think your way out of the moment, but you cannot think your way into it. Now, the intellect goes with thoughts. So the intellect can never, ever experience love. It can observe it, but it has no idea what it is. Mind never touches love. It's not what mind is about. And so the only place that love is in the moment. So this means, Gloria, that the only way you can experience love is consciously. There is no such thing as subconscious love. And so when you get 85% of people who spend, actually, I'll be honest, it's around about 93 to 95% of the human population living subconsciously for 93 to 95% of each day, which means their whole life, 93 to 95% of their whole life is spent subconscious. You cannot subconsciously experience love. You can only consciously love.
So basically, humans are just going through the motions.
The rest is just talking about emotions. You know, a husband says to his wife, I love you. 10 minutes later, he's talking to a friend and says, I love my car. And look at it. She's a beauty. I love it. The wife is talking about, she picked some flowers. I love these flowers. I love my husband. It doesn't compute. It doesn't add up, because what they all do, what we have is an emotional connection to a car, an emotional connection to a beautiful flower. We have very powerful emotional connections to our family. So unconditional love means that there are no conditions to your love. In other words, you might, for instance, have a son or a daughter who's had a row with a father or mother, and it's a really big row, and the father or mother unconditionally loves the son or the daughter, or the daughter or son unconditionally loves the parent with whom they've had a row, and is ready to be, ready for forgiveness, ready to let's make up, and the other one doesn't. And so you can have one person being hated and they still unconditionally love the person who's disliking them or hating them, because their love is not based on how that other person should behave. It's unconditional. William Blake was a very wise man, and he's gone down in history as a great philosopher. He was a great sculptor. He was a great poet. He had deep spiritual insights. He didn't go down so much that he played around with women. He was continually through his life with other women, but he was married. And one day his wife was told, you realize that William's been having affairs all his life, don't you? And she said, yes, I've always known. And they said, but why did you stay with him? And she looked at that person and said, I love him. She didn't say unconditionally, but she loved him, and there were no conditions to her love. Now, today we would tend to look, oh, what a silly woman, what a doormat, fancy doing that. But no, she was greater than her husband. His greatness probably came from the very fact that he was loved unconditionally by a single person, which is an incredible thing. So love, real love, is the power of creation. And when you're loving yourself unconditionally, then you are recreating yourself in the image of love. But even beyond that, it's rather like you're going into a dance. Your partner is love. Together, as you begin to dance, you create the music of your dance. And together you dance a new creation of music, which is life. And together, as you dance, love is creating you into its image, and you are recreating love into your image, because your uniqueness is also part of love. And so love is an ever-expanding consciousness that is never a constant. And so when there's no point where you can say, I love completely, all you can say is, as much as I know how, I am love, I am loving. And you'll probably find you're failing within that. And so love, unconditional love, it's so misunderstood. In France last year, I was talking about it, and a woman said, well, does this mean if I unconditionally love my husband, therefore he should do what I want him to do? I mean, I said to her, madam, I've been talking for 3 days. This is the best you've managed to get out of it. Anyway, what can you say? I mean, a lovely lady, she just doesn't get it. There's got to be something in it for me. That's too much of the human thinking. So to sum it up, I'll say this: left brain dominance can never experience can never experience love. Love is a whole brain heart experience. Love is the song of the soul. Everybody thinks that we are a body personality with a soul. Wrong. We are a soul, an immortal soul with a mortal body personality. And so people talk of my soul as though it's their pair of shoes. What we should do is talk of my body, speaking from the level of being the soul, because we're immortal beings. Mm-hmm. It's not a long time to figure this out, but, we don't have so long. I mean, we do. Except linear time is just another game we've created and play with. It's not real. Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you this. Religion, where does that fit in? Because there are so many, Christianity, for example.
Where does linear time fit in?
Mm-hmm. No, Christianity, religions of the world, more and more people are, I think, shifting away from organized religion and embracing, certainly the people that maybe I'm attracting into my life, but people are shifting away from organized religion where, like you said at the very start of the interview, where something outside of ourselves tells us what we're supposed to feel, how we're supposed to react. And I find that people, certainly myself, shift away from that. And so where does religion really has no place in what you're talking about at all, except that some great leaders and teachers came to us. For example, Jesus.
Religion fits in for people who are not ready to take their own power, people who believe in themselves, people who have no faith or no belief in themselves. Interestingly, in the world, the uneducated, the third world people are moving more into Catholicism and religion, and the people, as they become educated more and more self-aware, move away from it. And so I don't think it's ever had a place, because there've been more religious wars in the world than there ever have been for anything else. Everything else put together wouldn't get close to the reasons of the religious wars we've had, and I don't think they've ever had a place in our history at all, but they've been there simply because people have not been ready to take the highest level of responsibility for themselves. So they, instead of having a direct conversation with God, they've had an intermediary, and generally that intermediary was as corrupt as they were.
Yes.
And I I don't mean corrupt in a bad way, although plenty of them have been, but I mean as full of self-deceit as every normal human being.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask something here. With you made a statement about the religion. You said that people that are not able to basically rely on themselves, trust their inner voice. Is that what you're referring to? Because I find that so many people that still cling to religion, the number one reason that they do is guilt. They're afraid they're going to go to a place called hell. Address that.
I remember a story of Krishnamurti. He ended a talk and a man was there and said, Krishnamurti, I've been coming to your talks for 20 years. And Krishnamurti said, yes. He said, it is so sad, isn't it? And I thought, what a lovely statement. But I mean, because he had become the prop for this man. This man relied on Krishnamurti. This is one of the little fears that I used to have. I let go of it because I refused to be anybody's prop. And at the end of a 5-day intensive, nobody, in 22 years this will be, nobody has ever looked on me as their power, their strength. Always are pointed toward themselves. And so self-reliance, you know, I as a metaphysical traveler, I can go back into the time of when we had hunter-gatherers. Now, on this planet Earth, in the time of hunter-gatherers, the energy was very, very different. There was no civilization like we have now. There was no greed, we weren't full of wants. Most of the hunter-gatherers were in clans or tribes, but mostly clans. And everybody in the clan looked after the clan. Nobody had ownership apart from a few things like knives and clothing. And so there was no ownership. And there was a very, very beautiful, it all held together very cohesively. But the point is, everybody in every clan was self-reliant. They certainly had the clan to be there, rather like we have family. But there was a much, much higher level of self-reliance than there is today. Today, in Australia, you know, I mean, this is not a criticism of people, but everybody looks to a government to blame them. Blame this, blame them for that. And yet, every human being creates their own reality. In every moment of your life, you are creating the content and the direction of every moment of your life.
I've been saying it for years.
And so, you know, blaming governments, blaming local council, blaming neighbours, we create the situation we're in. And so we've become a nation, we've become a human population of blame and want. Blame and want. The more we have, everything on television teaches us to want more, to want more. There's an old saying, I put it on Facebook the other day. I always have Michael's musings, and most days I change it and put a new one on. And I wrote the other day, there's an old English saying, that which we desire the most shall enslave us in the end. And so what we desire and wants never, ever reach saturation point. It never happens. And so the more we want, the more we get, the more we want, the more we get, the more we want, and the more we are completely lost, that we're completely isolated from our reality of the spiritual being on our path of growing in consciousness. And today, there are now two types of people. There is the rapidly increasing numbers of people who are emerging to suddenly realize, my God, who am I? What's this all about? Those numbers are increasing every day. There's no question about this. And there are those who are completely, utterly unconcerned about anything except how much money can they earn and how can they pay their mortgage and how can they deal with all their problems. I learned recently that 100 million people every day take antidepressants. Now, you know, when your pineal and pituitary glands are operating on a very low level, depression is normal because you're feeling isolated and cut off from a greater reality. Those people would say, greater reality, what are you talking about? And a greater reality, we are universal beings. We live on a planet, in a galaxy, in a solar system, in the universe. This is where we live. We're part of a whole universal energy. And yet humans have become completely isolated and separate. We look out of our eyes and we see the distance between us and the person we're talking to. We see separation. It's a lie. It's our physical senses. What we don't say, oh yes, that's right, my physical body sees separation, but I'm a metaphysical being and there is no separation. I'm connected with whom I'm talking to. Mm-hmm. I'm connected with whom I'm thinking about. I'm connected with every person in the government. It's all one human consciousness. And so the person who thinks isolated thoughts, sees separation and lives separation, and who is gradually over the incarnations atrophying their pineal, then they do get depressed, and it's a terrible situation we have in the world today because it's growing so rapidly. 50% of everybody in hospital is there, first of all, because of anxiety and depression. That's the mother and father of pretty well everything that follows on in the way of illness. You know, I'm trying to tell you this in 1 hour. I take 5 days to do this in an intensive.
Well, I want you to keep going, but let me ask you this, Michael. Do you think we have a choice? Do you think that we deliberately choose to incarnate into this physical body?
Okay, let's put it this way. A long time ago, we had a choice and we chose to incarnate into this human body. Once we started took that step, we then continue to incarnate until we reach a place in consciousness where we go beyond it. I mean, there is a fifth dimensional reality. I've been there. You've got to realize, Gloria, it's not quite as simple as it seems. In every level of dimension is a state of consciousness. Now, this is a three-dimensional reality. But on a three-dimensional reality level, there are probably as many as 130 levels of three-dimensional reality. Look on it as a book. You've got a three-dimensional book, 130 pages on it. You and I are on the same page. Some people are on different pages. And so this is what's happening, but it's all in the one book. And so the confusion is, somebody says, I don't understand. I mean, the regular normal person would look on me as insane, but they're on a different page in the book. Mm-hmm. And you can understand why they would think that. Sure. So you and I are on the same page of this book and we're talking. And if there's anybody listening to this, those people are on the same page. Mm-hmm. And they're liking it, they're enjoying it. But if somebody from a different page tunes in and listens, he would say, well, that guy's probably as mad as a hatter. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what Australians are like. They're all mad. And so, there are many, many pages. This does not mean that we go through every page of the book before we move on to a higher dimension. It means the page we're on holds all our perfect growth. So life is vast. You know, as I travel metaphysically out into the universe, I find it's a multiverse. I knew that 15 years ago. I think they're just now putting the mathematics together to come up with a supposition that we live in a multiverse. Of course we do. And so life is vast. It is vast beyond anything we can imagine. And for some reason, we've taken this vastness that we feel, that we just feel it, and we've turned it into a complexity. And so we have become complex creatures trying to understand the complexity of life. But life is not complex. It is vast on a scale that is incomprehensible to us humans the way we are. I think what I did differently, if you've got 1,000 gallons of water in a tank and you are 1 gallon, you realize that you can't possibly take 1,000 gallons and put it in 1 gallon. You can't do that. You wouldn't understand what was happening. You would overflow it. You just couldn't hold it. And most people try to put the 1,000 gallons in the 1 gallon and spend their life trying to understand everything. Quite a while ago, I realized that this is impossible. So I did something that most people don't do. This is just a metaphor. But I took me, the 1 gallon, and put it in the 1,000. And so in doing that, I lost me. I lost identity. I realized that identity is just a complete game we play. It's an illusion. I lost me. I lost identity, and I became something slightly different. And then I found that I could still not hold the 1,000 gallons in me, because I was still had my own sense of separation of self. But what I found was anything in the 1,000 gallons was available at any stage that I needed it. And so if I went in there wanting, then I would probably have gone insane in that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't go in wanting. I went in open. So if I need to know something, generally if I focus on it, within 24 hours I know it. But that's just me, and I don't do that unless there is a need. I never do it because I want.
So you think that all knowledge and wisdom is available to us if we're really truly open and seeking it?
Yes, it's there for everybody. Everybody's in the 1,000 gallon tank. That was one of the things I found, but nobody knows it. Well, just a few do. But everybody's in it, but nobody knows it. They all think they're the 1 gallon on the outside. And so you've got to throw yourself into it, and you certainly lose identity. You realize that identity is just a silly game we've been playing.
Yeah, I want to stop there for a second on the identity, because we hear so much about finding ourself, where you're talking just the opposite about losing self.
No, I'm talking about losing identity.
Identity, so okay.
America and they say, who are you? Well, I'm Michael Rhodes. I'm fine. You can come into America. If I came into America and I said, who are you? I'm a magnificent, metaphysical, multidimensional being of love and light. They say, oh, good. We have a little room for people like that. And so that I wouldn't get into America because
you might.
See, that would be a truth out of timing. I mean, instead of embracing me and saying, wonderful, I'm a magnificent being of love and light too, and giving me a hug, he would look at me and say, well, okay, we've got a lunatic into the little room. And so you cannot, we're not ready for truth. Truth, there's a timing to truth. A caterpillar never changes into a cocoon out of timing. A bird's egg never hatches out of timing. Everything in nature is timing. A bud opens and unfolds into a flower in perfect timing. In humanity, we completely discard timing. We completely forget about it. But there's a timing to everything, and there's a timing for truth. So we are our own timing. And as we grow in consciousness, so we keep triggering more and more and more. And so the difference between identity and self is huge. Identity is the name and that we give to the body that we have. And we need that in the way we set up. Well, personality is what the body takes on. And generally, when you lose your body, if you are a well-advanced human being, you will let go of personality over about the next year. And then you will become a much more clear being of light and love. And you'll incarnate with that, without the wisps of persona hanging on. Mm-hmm. Today, many people are caught up with clouds of personas from their past all hanging around them, because people today are so uncentered. So today is about the development of self. But who is self? Self is a beautiful being of love and light. Now, as words, that means nothing. As energy, as knowing, as living it, it's a whole different ballgame. It's something else entirely. You see, when you know that you are a beautiful being of love and light, you have about 50 to 60 trillion cells in your body. Every cell gets that message. Every cell, the walls of the cell relax. The DNA become loose and slightly unwind and relax. You feel your whole body relax, your joints relax. All over your body, there's relaxation. the mind becomes much more clear. I don't experience worry. I've forgotten what it feels like. I don't experience anxiety. I don't experience depression. I very, very rarely get tired. I can get tired if I go out in the garden and work like crazy in about 95 degrees of heat. That can get me.
Mm-hmm.
But I never get tired from life or traveling and journeying. I come back with more energy than I went because I've been so focused in love. And so I don't get ill and sick. I don't do those things. And it's easy to not have them. It takes a lot of energy to create those things. I mean, anxiety and depression takes an enormous amount of energy.
And it's something we create in the mind, in the brain. It's something we create for ourselves, because we have 4 minutes. So I want you to be aware of the time, because I want you to tell our listeners, what are your final thoughts? I mean, I wish I could have you on for 2 more hours. I could listen to this all day, but what are your final thoughts for our listeners as far as meditation? What are your thoughts on that?
I won't say anything about meditation or medication.
Meditation. I
don't meditate,
okay.
and I don't medicate.
Okay.
So what I would say is, you are a human being. You're the sum total of many lifetimes, and you are a beautiful being. In truth, you're metaphysical. The only thing about you that's physical is your body. Your thoughts, your emotions, mind, love, everything like that is metaphysical. So what I would say is, you've tried self-criticism. You've tried blaming yourself. You've tried guilt. They don't work. To me, I teach people, if it doesn't work, stop doing it. If it works, keep doing it. Mm-hmm. One thing that works is, and this is what I write on Facebook every day, choose love. Mm-hmm. When you're starting to criticize yourself and you realize you're doing it, suddenly stop and say, no, enough. I choose love. I choose to love myself in this moment. And if you're arguing with somebody else and you realize, my God, how long have I been doing this? You stop and say, no, I choose love. I choose to love me. And because I love me, I also love this other person. I'm not arguing anymore. What does it matter who's right and wrong? Mm-hmm. What does it matter in the whole cosmic event of the world, of the universe? What does it matter who's right and who's wrong? And so you just choose love. You choose to love yourself. You feel it. You begin your day. This is what I would say. Paint your thumbnails green.
Paint them green.
I mean this, a strong green nail varnish. And every time through the day you see those green nails, just say to yourself, stop for a moment, just for a moment, 10 seconds, and say, I consciously choose to love myself. I consciously choose love. At the moment you're consciously choosing love, and you'll never do it subconsciously, the moment you're consciously choosing love, you are connecting with life. You're out of linear time. You're connecting with love, and that moment is timeless, and it's incredibly powerful. This is the way you break the subconscious program. You consciously choose love 100, 200, 400 times a day. It doesn't matter. And there's no use by date. You keep doing it until gradually you become aware that you're choosing love without needing to see your green thumbnails. You're choosing love, and that you're not having arguments, that you're no longer criticizing yourself. You choose to appreciate yourself, to respect yourself. You have to choose those things.
Oh, that's a fantastic way to end the show, because I'm getting a cue that we're out of time here. Michael, okay. That was absolutely phenomenal. For our listeners, please, if you want to get any of Michael's books or hear any of his CDs, you can go to his website at Michael Rhodes. That's ROADS, michaelrhodes.com. Also, you can like him on Facebook, because you do get his daily musings. Michael, that was fantastic. I wish you would grant me another interview.
Yeah, of course I will.
Oh, that would be wonderful. This was fantastic. And I love how you ended it with choosing love, because the more conscious we become of what we're doing and what's going on in our lives, even the bad things that happen in our lives, if we just choose love, it can
That's right.
absolutely change the energy field in us, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Choose love. If everybody did that, the world would change and humanity would change with it. Then we would create a miracle,
Oh,
the real miracle of life.
well, let's work on that, everybody. Let's choose love today,
And
tonight.
thank you, Gloria.
Oh, you are so welcome. I'm going to have you back again because I know my listeners are going to be wanting to know when you're going to come back on. Thank you so much for granting us this interview. I know it's Thursday morning there for you, and it's Wednesday evening. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Talking with Gloria. We're going to have Michael Rhodes back again sometime in the near future, and I'll let you know when that will be. In the meantime, everybody have a fantastic evening. Michael and Carolyn, thank you again so much for granting us. Have a wonderful day.
Our pleasure.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, Carolyn. Okay, everybody, we'll see you next Tuesday at 1 o'clock on Talking with Gloria.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in.
She has a wonderful personality. She really does.
You are listening to Talking with Gloria.
Let's take a walk on the wild side.
With your host, Gloria Ponziano.